Good morning, everyone. Maybe early morning, possibly some other time zone. But thank you for joining another in the Wilson Center's series of important conversations on gender-based violence. I'm Jane Harmon, the Director, President, and CEO of the Wilson Center, a former 9-term member of Congress. This issue is close to my heart as I was one in Congress who focused a great deal on violence against women in our military, which, oh, by the way, still exists. And I was proud to support the Violence Against Women Act, which passed Congress in 1994. Discussions like today's, which cut across several of the Wilson Center's regional programs, are the reason the Wilson Center has been named the #1 think tank in the world for regional studies 3 years in a row. About a month ago, we held an event discussing the shadow pandemic of skyrocketing domestic and intimate partner violence as governments around the world imposed COVID-19 lockdowns. Today, we're continuing the discussion with a specific focus on Latin America. Recent statistics are horrible and demonstrate the alarming trend of violence against women and girls. Just a few examples. In Brazil, femicide rates increased 22% in March and April compared to the same time last year, and calls to domestic violence hotlines have surged. In Mexico, 987 women and girls were murdered in the first 4 months of 2020. The number for April broke a 5-year record. In El Salvador, and we have someone from El Salvador on this call, during the last 2 weeks of March, over 50% more women died from femicide than from COVID-19. It's horrible. These numbers underline the sad truth that for many women, home is not a refuge. In many countries, neither is the criminal justice system, despite laws criminalizing femicide and other forms of gender-based violence. In 1994, countries across the region adopted the Belém do Pará, Belém do Pará Convention, formalizing violence against women as a human rights violation. Since then, countries such as Brazil, El Salvador, and Mexico have passed laws criminalizing femicide and domestic abuse. But the implementation has lagged and impunity is widespread. For example, in Mexico, get this, over 90%, 90% of femicides go unpunished. Trying to get more in the middle of my screen. Let's see if, there I am. For the past 5 years, women across the region have protested under the banner Una menos, which means not one less. In other words, not another woman lost to femicide. The movement has resurged in recent months, but the outlook remains dim. The official statistics show that one woman is killed on the basis of her gender every 2 hours, in Latin America. But the real number is likely much higher. No doubt the US has bad statistics too, but these are alarming. And these are the ones we will focus on today with experts from the region. We are joined by several brilliant women who will help explain the legal, social, and other barriers that have allowed this shadow pandemic to continue. Introducing our speakers and moderating the conversation is the wonderful and fabulous Anya Prusa, Senior Associate at the Brazil Institute and coordinator of our gender-based violence, coordinator of our gender-based violence program in Latin America, and who's also looking around the world at where this is happening elsewhere. So over to you, Anya, and thank you for bringing this particular focus and all these brilliant women to the Wilson Center.
Thank you, Jane. All of us working on this project deeply appreciate your support for this work and for your support for combating the challenge of gender-based violence in Latin America and around the world. Even before the pandemic and its lockdowns arrived in Latin America, the region had the highest rate of sexual violence and some of the highest femicide numbers in the world. As Jane said, many of these cases go unpunished. In Mexico, research indicates that just 7% of crimes against women are investigated, in part because women do not trust authorities and do not file complaints. This is not unique to Mexico. In Brazil, a study several years ago found that 85% of respondents believe that women who report abusive partners risk further violence. The data bears this out. 55% of cases of femicide in Brazil, the motive was that the woman was trying to leave or break up the relationship. There is a clear need not only to encourage women to report, but to protect them once they do. COVID-19 has exacerbated this challenge, but it has not created it. As Congresswoman Harman mentioned, the Wilson Center is launching a new project, Accessing Justice, Femicide, and the Rule of Law in Latin America, to explore this issue, and also to bring together experts and practitioners to discuss not just the problem, but possible solutions. I'm proud to be doing some of this work along with my colleagues Beatriz Garcia-Nice of the Latin America program, Olivia Soledad of the Mexico Institute, and the Center's Woman and Gender Advisor, Sarah Barnes. I would encourage all of you to check out the project. It's available at wilsoncenter.org/gender-based violence, and you can also subscribe to receive updates and invitations to events like this one. Today, we have an exceptional panel of experts, all of whom, along with their institutions, have worked closely on the issue of gender-based violence in Latin America. Georgiana Braga Orilard is a resident representative in El Salvador for the United Nations Development Program. Juliana Martins is institutional coordinator for the Brazilian Forum on Public Safety. Claudia Calvin is the founder of Mujeres Construyendo and a member of Nosotros Tenemos Otros Datos. We'll have a Q&A period later in the event. If you want to ask a question, please tweet at the Wilson Center and use the hashtag #GenderAtWilson to join the conversation. Without further ado, let's get started. Georgiana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anya. Thank you, Wilson Center. Thank you, Jane, Harman, Beatriz, for the invitation to be here with you. I'm very happy to share this panel with these wonderful women. Kudos really to the Wilson Center for the launch of this initiative. I think it's very much needed. And today we will explore experiences of El Salvador, where I represent UNDP, my home country, Brazil, and a very dear country, Mexico. So I feel very much engaged and very much energized in this discussion today. I will start my presentation. I have pictures and numbers, but before I show pictures and numbers, I would like to say that behind these pictures and numbers and figures, we have women, and women who are really needing support and needing to be protected, not only from the most horrible of the crimes, which is homicide, but also from a very much violent day-to-day, violent routines that they suffer, rape, harassment in the workplace as well, and as well as in the public arena, in politics. So I think that we need to look at this pandemic, and I really would like it not to be a shadow pandemic, but a very much open and discussed pandemic. So, but we would like to really expose this and to say that this would not happen without very major structural barriers, and that's what I would like to talk about. And I would also mention that when I'm talking about women and when I'm talking about the most vulnerable here, not to forget that we are also talking about the LGBTI population and the transgender people, because this is also something that we cannot forget, to always look at the ones that are most left behind. So just sharing my screen right now, very quickly. There you go. First, I would like to mention a little bit what we do at UNDP. UNDP globally support partners and legal policy frameworks to combat gender-based violence, and also supports national capacities to prevent violence and end impunity, as well as to ensure justice and protection of women and girls, to provide survivors as well with the multi-sectoral supports and services. UNDP has been in El Salvador working for the past 20 years in violence prevention initiatives, awareness raising programs, as well as behavior changing campaigns, and working very closely with other partners and other agencies. Just 3 examples of what we are doing today. Here is the InfoSegura regional project, which is a partnership with the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. And InfoSegura is something that regionally we are trying to have data and actually to register data, because this is one of the key issues that we found, is that was not enough data in registered and systematic to know what the dimension of what the problem was. The Spotlight Initiative, as you probably have heard, this is a global multi-year program, and it's a partnership between the United Nations and the European Union on all forms, to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. And we are also working this to focus on eradicating femicides in El Salvador. And the last one, very innovative, and we started very recently with the Peace Beauty Fund of the United Nations, is women free of violence in public transportation, because we have seen that public transportation here in El Salvador is, after home, it's probably the place where people or women feel most unsafe. So these are 3 examples. But here I would like to also to say a little bit about data. So the Human Development Report, the 2019 Human Development Report, was focusing on inequalities, and it brought very clearly this gender gap. It was inviting to look beyond averages, because when you get the averages of population, you don't see the picture for women, because women are normally the ones being lagged behind. Here, some of this information that was posted published on the report is the gender biased. And if you see here on the gender bias, you see that 91% of men and 86% of women show some kind of bias against gender equality in areas such as politics, economics, education, physical integrity. Half the world's men and also women feel that men make better political leaders. Over 40% feel that men make better business executives, and that men have more right to a job when they are scarce. Right now, with the COVID pandemic, we know that that's going to be the case. Worse, as you can see in the graph, these biases have increased over time. So this is something of what we should be looking at, the idea of the monolithic family with a breadwinner and homemakers. This is what is being fueling this violence epidemic, because this is not the reality. We know that here in El Salvador, with a very, very strong informal economy, we know that women are out there working, and women are especially working in the most vulnerable jobs. So they make very much a higher percentage of the informal sector. We can see that, for example, we have accumulated vulnerabilities. This is from a local and El Salvador study that from 2018, and you can see this is the probability of insertion in the market, in the job market, and you see by age, and then the age and gender, and then you're seeing the probability of insertion is being reduced if you're a woman, if you're a young woman, if you're in the rural area, if you have caregiving tasks, if you have less schooling, or if you have no education. Basically the flat line in terms of insertion and in terms of inclusion of these women. We therefore look at the gender-based violence as a multidimensional problem, and therefore requires a multidimensional approach. I just mentioned the human development part, but we also look at it as a human rights issue, as we know that globally 30% of women have experienced physical and sexual violence at some time in their lives. Here in El Salvador, 67% of women have been victims of some type of violence in their life cycle. So 63% of them were psychological violence, 26% physical violence, and 43% sexual violence. So it is an epidemic. It's huge. And I have to say, I was very, I felt very strongly when in the invitation for this panel, it was saying that this is probably one of the most violent countries for women in the whole world. And it's true. And we really need to work on the systemic, because it is one of the most violent countries in the world, but also even more so for women. And we really need to look into this systemic issues. And that's where citizen security comes into, because we know that gender-based violence also impact the national efforts to improve citizen security, and affects also the results of the strategies. It goes hand in hand, because it goes in the feeling of impunity. We know that when citizen security improves, also violence against women improve, because it really goes hand in hand, and therefore it is crucial to include the gender perspective in citizen security policies and strategies of the country. According to the Salvadorian National Survey of Violence Against Women, only 6 of 100 women, so 6%, denounced their aggressors. And this is also another part of the problem. That's why we put into the citizen security issue as well, because most women don't denounce because of fear of a lack of their own rights, and also that they don't know what resources are available to them. And lastly, the humanitarian approach, that really means that we need to promote security for women, and sometimes it's really even getting them out of their homes, having specialized jurisdiction for them, and support the reconstruction of their lives in these terms. Here it's just to show very quickly the comparison between El Salvador, Mexico, and Brazil. You can see that the high numbers right there. But when you see the proportionate numbers, you can see that El Salvador is really at a high level, much higher than most countries in the region. But the good news is that femicides have reduced, and have reduced 57% from 2016 to 2019, which is very good news. So we really want to accelerate this trend. It's still at epidemic levels, but it has been accelerated, and we really would like to accompany that and support and really accelerate that improvement. So legal framework here, it's something that we need to, let me put this, here are the strengths of El Salvador and what's been helping this decrease. It's really that to have a legal framework to prevent violence against women. Since 2012, there is one. There's a specialized jurisdiction since 2017. There is an institutional framework to comply. Basically, there are units of access to justice that were created in the entire justice system, and as well as in local units. So you can have a proximity also with women, and that's a very much needed access point as well for women. We have national police it's called For a Life Free of Violence, especially for women, since 2016. So that is also the accessing specialized police. There is a femicide protocol, very specific. We have been supporting as well with Spotlight this effort, which is very important as well. Basic services. There is a Ciudad Mujer, no, the women's city that is being that was built here, and also that offers some basic services for women to attend complaints, health services, territorial management of care, and also the last one, strengthening capacities. There is ISDEMU, which is the National Institute, and they created the Equity School to promote training to the public sector. So these are some of the initiatives and some of the basic efforts that we would like to scale. And just to put a little bit on COVID, well, it was mentioned in the beginning that this situation has exacerbated. The home is not something positive for most women. Denouncing, to be able to call someone, call for help when you have the aggressor locked with you at home was not easy. It hasn't been easy. And now with the reopening, we hope that these numbers are going to reduce. But it's still very much in the economic side, we're going to see a vulnerability, an increased vulnerability for women. So most likely we're not going to see the numbers, unfortunately, reducing in the near future. Just, I'm not going to the challenges, but as you can imagine, the challenges, the difficulties are throughout. So we talk about gender-based violence needs to be at the center of public policy. We need to enhance the legal framework. Coordination is an issue when you have institutions that are, especially now with the COVID, not online, not open to everyone. So it's a little bit complicated to have that coordination right now, more so than in the normal times. Also, access to justice needs to be close to women, territorialization of that, information, data, systematization, and obviously funding is very crucial at this moment as well. We know that the numbers are extreme. We know that most women are killed at home. Most women were killed by small arms. So 54% were killed by small arms in the country. So which is, as I was mentioning, the citizen security fueling this pandemic as well, or epidemic in the country is very complicated here. And I think that this is where we should be looking into, very much so. And just to finalize this presentation, I would like to say that UNDP is very much committed. We are very much committed here at the country to support not only the government, but the justice institutions, civil society, the private sector, and to really bridge these efforts because we know that human development is not going to happen if we don't tackle this epidemic and if we don't bring access to justice for these women. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Georgiana. I think many of the themes you touched on we're going to be hearing again, and so I really look forward to the Q&A discussion where we can get a little bit more comparative. Juliana Martins, I'm going to go to you next to talk about the situation in Brazil.
Thank you, Anya. Thank you all. It's a great pleasure to be here. Can you hear me? Yeah, it's okay. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. First of all, I would like to apologize for my English. It's been a long time since I've been training, practicing English. So I will read to you a text about domestic violence and femicide in Brazil. I am a psychologist. I have a PhD in psychology from the University of São Paulo, and I also the institutional coordinator at Brazilian Forum on Public Safety. We are an NGO and non-profit organization dedicated to building an environment of reference and technical cooperation in the area of public security. The organization is made up of researchers, social scientists, public officials, federal, civil, military police. We have many kinds of police institutions in Brazil. It would take a long time for me to explain it. But we also have justice operators and professionals from civil society entities who together contribute to making information about violence and security policies and finding evidence-based solutions. Our aim is to produce information to generate transformation. I would like to talk about gender-based violence in Brazil before and during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some important facts. It is not the pandemic that causes the domestic violence or gender-based violence. It makes a problem that is very serious even worse. Gender-based violence has been increasing in Brazil in recent years. The Brazilian Forum on Public Safety produces every year an annual report that gathered national statistics regarding police institutions and crimes in Brazil. Such statistics are produced from the state's police criminal records, information on prison system, expenditures on public safety, among other records varying through the editions. The most recent data available shows that in 2018, the reports of aggression as a result of domestic violence has increased. Every 2 minutes, a woman was a victim of domestic violence. We are considering here the cases in which the victim had reported the aggression. This indicates that the numbers are much higher. Research shows that home is the most dangerous place for girls and women in Brazil. In cases of femicide and of domestic and family violence, the aggressor is, in around 8% of the cases, someone known by the victim. Her partner, her previous partner, someone with whom she has or had a bond of affection and trust. A victimization survey carried out by the Brazilian Forum on Public Safety in 2019 showed that 52% of women who suffered any type of violence did nothing. They did not seek help from family members or police authorities. Only 10% of them went to a police station, and 5% of them called the military police emergency number seeking for help. During the pandemic, the Brazilian Forum on Public Safety gathered data from 12 Brazilian states, the one that would respond to us in a very short period of time, because some of states here, they don't have the data available every month and so on. We could found out that all registers that depended on the physical presence of the woman in a police station to report the aggression or the violence that she suffered decreased in the first 2 months of the pandemic. Emergency protective measures, restraining orders, also fell in this period, reflecting the decrease in records. But that does not mean that violence against girls and women has decreased, and we can observe that femicides increased by 22% in April, for example, compared to the same period last year. And we also had an increase in emergency calls to the military police, and these calls may not be made by the victim. In other words, the numbers indicate that women are not able to denounce the violence they are suffering because of social isolation measures. She's locked with the aggressor, and all the vulnerable factors that existed before, they are more intense in this period of isolation. We have here many challenges. I will address some of them. First of all, these are crimes with a strong cultural root. We've been socialized to understand that there are specific gender roles to be performed by men and women, and that we cannot leave this predetermined roles that we should be performing. These crimes are usually underreported. Data available shows that in most cases of femicide, the victims had never reported any violence she had been suffering to the police or the authorities. So despite of good laws, how can we effectively protect these women? There are a northeast state in Brazil, Piauí, that found out that more than 90% of the murdered women in Piauí, they never went to a police station or never reported the violence that they've been suffering. And they created, for example, a unit in the civil police to study the femicide cases, to understand why this woman is dying, is being murdered because she's a woman and she's not reaching the authorities or the official authorities to report the violence that she's been suffering for a long time, sometimes a long time. And there's also a challenge for police officers that usually the aggressor in this kind of crimes, violence, domestic violence, or femicide, they doesn't correspond to the stereotype of enemy and criminal that the police were trained to identify. Sometimes they can be the father, the husband, a good employee, someone that no one would suspect of being someone violent. So it's a big challenge for police officers to understand that this is a different kind of violence, and the perpetrator is someone that does not correspond to that stereotype of the enemy or the criminal that the police were trained to identify. When a woman calls the police, she wants to stop being beaten or suffering violence. But sometimes she decided not to formally report the aggression, because sometimes the aggressor often is the father of her children or on whom she depends financially, and she decides not to report the aggression. And often the same woman calls the police several times on different occasions. This is frustrating for the police, who are trained to arrest and they are not trained to understand the complexities of violence against women. Of course, that deciding not to report does not mean enjoying suffering violence. But this is something that is very difficult for some of the police officers here in Brazil, and I think in many countries, to understand. Violence against women is therefore not understood here as a police work, and is not seen as a priority by the police authorities. I think that one of the reasons is that the police productive metric considers that a good job and a good work would be the number of prisons, the number of drugs and weapons that they could get from criminals, and so attending to this kind of violence against women cases can be seen for some police officers as a waste of time, because they will not be recognized by their peers, the other police officers or their superiors as someone that is doing a job that matters or that is important, that its face is fighting criminality. So to try to address this kind of difficulties in a public security system, the Brazilian Forum on Public Safety has two initiatives that I can explain better later, but which are, one of them is a Quality Mark Award for innovative initiatives tackling violence against women and girls. It's an award to recognize initiatives within the police and justice system with a potential for transforming scenarios characterized by high vulnerability rates of violence against women, systematizing and diffusing the most relevant experience in such field. We have many experiences in Brazil that are carried out by police officers, such as the Piauí case that I told you before, that are being very innovative, although they are being carried out by specific people, individuals within the police forces that understand this is a problem, a very serious problem that must be faced and that must be a priority. But this is not an understand that the people that in command, the high authorities and the police institutions think that they don't have the same understand that it's really important. So it's a difficult to address these initiatives as something permanent or institutionalized, some of the experiences as something important for the institution and for the society to protect women. So we can see that some of these experiences are they have a period of existence, and then sometimes they doesn't exist anymore, and it's very difficult to create this culture within the police institutions, and also to discuss within the police institution the violence that police women suffers within the institution, and the lack of equipment for police women, and so on. The other initiative that we have is that we developed a manual to train the trainers to engage the police in a more holistic way, opening their eyes to issues around violence against women and girls, getting them to examine their own beliefs about gender roles, and helping them work as professionals to prevent gender-based violence where possible, and give support and guidance to victims where necessary. The Brazilian Forum on Public Safety, with Professor Fiona Macaulay from Bradford University. I am one of the authors of this manual. We've been delivering workshops for police officers around Brazil for the last 3 or 4 years to discuss these issues and to develop the training to trainers, or to engage the police in this discussion, and to strengthen the initiatives that they already have in this matter. So I think that's all. I don't know if later I can answer some questions.
Great, thank you,
Thank you.
Juliana. I'm sure we'll be coming back to you later with questions, asking for a bit more detail on a few of the initiatives you mentioned. I want to go next to Claudia Calvin in Mexico City for an update on what's going on there and some of the programs underway.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues and friends. I want to congratulate the Wilson Center for pushing forward the gender agenda. I think it's really, really important for think tanks to go deeply into the gender international agenda, and femicide is one of the main issues internationally. Thank you so much, Jane, Anya, Olivia. Thank you so much for the invitation, and Juliana and Georgiana, it's a pleasure to be here with you. I would like to address femicide in Mexico from 3 different perspectives. But before, I would like just to say that I think it's not a coincidence that Brazil, El Salvador, and Mexico are being presented today. Of the 25 worst countries to be women in the world, 16 are in Latin America. And unfortunately, the ones that almost every year have one of the first 3 places are Mexico, Brazil, El Salvador, sometimes Colombia or other countries, but our 3 countries are really like hell for women to live in terms of gender-based violence. As I was saying, I would like to address femicide in Mexico from 3 perspectives. I will begin talking about the data that we have regarding femicide and violence against women in the context of COVID and the pandemic. I will approach the institutional challenges, the context of institutional violence that we're facing as women. And then I'll talk about what civil society is doing, and that's why I'm here representing Nosotras Tenemos Otros Datos, which is a group of women from different standpoints, political perspective, independent, involved in politics, or different associations, but we all have in common one challenge, and one thing unites us, and that is the fight against violence, against gender-based violence and femicide. And we want to exercise also the right to information, because the official data is minimizing and wants to make the problem invisible. I will begin just by stating a few of the chilling and worrisome data that we have. Between January and April of this year, we have 1,295 women killed. Of these, 308 have been classified as homicides and 987 as intentional homicides. What's the difference? The protocol. But what we can say is that in these months, 1,295 women have been killed. And the figures are, the figures given by the government and the figures that you can find in the media and through the organizations that are linked to the fight against violence are extremely different. For example, in 2 of the states that we have been working with in Nosotras Tenemos Otros Datos, the official figures of Aguascalientes, one of the states that has a high level of femicides, is that only 1 woman has been killed. And according to civil organizations, 32 women have been killed. In Guerrero, the official data states that only 11 women have been killed, and the other information coming from civil organizations states that 68 women have been killed. There's a huge disparity in the data. There's also El Secretariado Ejecutivo, which is the official institution that talks about this information. The official reports between January and April are terrible also. For example, there have been documented, and Juliana and Georgiana mentioned, and I think this is something that our countries have in common, have mentioned that it's not easy for the victims to file complaints. But in this 4-month period, we have found that 5,569 filed complaints have been documented in the period. That means 46 sexual assaults have been documented daily, documented. And when we realize that only 4% of the sexual assault victims report, that is 96% of the victims don't report the aggressions they live, I mean, we should feel terrible for what's going on and for the lack of action from the governmental official, from the governmental position. There have been in this period also intentional injuries, and this is really important because it talks about intentions to kill women, attempts to kill women. There have been 19,288 intentional injuries filed and complained. That is 19,288 women are alive miraculously because their aggressors tried to kill them. And we're talking about strong injuries, really strong injuries, injuries that not only bruises, we're talking about terrible things that are going on. So this is the context of the confinement that we are living in. Underreporting violence is a common challenge in our countries. What does Mexico say about femicide? In Mexico's Federal Criminal Code, Article 325 recognizes femicide. And there are 7 conditions under this specific violence is considered femicide, making like a resume. To classify a crime as femicide, our criminal code requires that the victim displays signs of sexual violence or the existence of previous threats. There must be evidence of harassment, a history also of violent episodes, probably or a romantic relationship. This is very important, that the deprivation of the victim's freedom or the forced exposure of a person's body in a public place. And this is important, and it's symbolic. This exposure of a person's body in a public place has a strong symbolic charge, because in this culture where violence is normalized and where stereotypes are very embedded in our culture, women are theoretically should participate in the private sphere. So the exposure of a woman's body in a public place is a way of the assault and the killer of saying, you don't pertain here. The public sphere belongs to us, and your body that should be private is in the public sphere. So it's a really, really complex situation. And what we have in Mexico, and Jane, thank you, Jane, sorry, I didn't mention you and I had you in my head. As Jane mentioned, 90% of the homicides in Mexico, general homicides, can be included in the area of impunity. According to the Femicide Observatory in Mexico, 99% of homicides go impune. That is, there's no justice, there's no law, and there's no follow-up in this case. Now, I will jump to the institutional context that I was talking about, because the pandemic, as my predecessors said, the pandemic is just making visible a reality that has been going on for decades. Violence against women, femicides, are not new. But what is new probably is the fact that the media and civil society is putting and pushing strongly forward this topic. What does this mean in the Mexican case? Our institutional context is very complex in the sense that we had the general attorney, for example, in February, saying that he wanted to eradicate, and he made a proposal, and that now it's stopped, but he wanted to make a proposal where femicide would be left out of the penal code. That means, and the basis for this decision was that it's very complex to demonstrate a femicide. It's not complex to demonstrate a femicide. There are 7 very clear things that can be determined in order to know if there was a femicide. And what the attorney wanted to do was consider it intentional homicide of violence against women. What's the difference? It's not difficult to prove it. What we need is, first of all, political decision and compromise. We need to train the police, ministerios públicos, and the whole judicial chain to understand the problem. They need to judge in terms of gender. There must be a gender perspective in the whole process. And there has to be an understanding that whoever kills a woman and commits a femicide will go to jail. But when you have a context of impunity, killing a woman could be as strong as stepping over an ant. There's no consequence for this, and this is terrible. And adding to this, we have to put other factors on the table. One of the main factors is the governmental position headed by the president of our country, in which he has absolutely minimized gender violence in this country. And this is not new. If you see an interview that Jorge Ramos made him in 2017, I think it was, when he was candidate, he said that women, when Jorge asked if he was feminist, his answer was, women should go to heaven. And well, he's fulfilling it. We're going to heaven because we're being killed. And when he's asked if he's feminist, he says he's humanist. What has been the official response to the femicide and this pandemic that we're facing? First of all, the president has said that the calls to 911 have been 90% false. That is, he is ignoring what his own institutions are giving as official data. That's part of the reasons why Nosotras Tenemos Otros Datos was born. We have other information, because his permanent answer to the questionings is, I have other data, even if the data comes from his own institutions. The official answer to femicide has been the 10 points of the president against femicide. And the 10 points begin with an I. I am against violence in any of its manifestations. Women should be protected. It's coward to kill a woman. And so, but there's not a budget, there's not a protocol, there's not an institutional compromise. The result, and since he began, and since this administration began, is that the budget to protect women and to refugees and to, how do you say, guarderías, I forgot the name, where you take the kids, when you're a working woman, you take the kids to have them there. The budget has been reduced and eliminated. So we have no budget to protect women. We have no budget to take care of the kids. And all this money is going to a clientelar programs. So the context of COVID, feminicide, and the pandemic is increasing because we're living also institutional violence. What has happened? I mean, this is just a little bit to talk about it. Probably in the Q&A, I can talk a bit more about the media proposal of count to 10 and bring out white flags to avoid femicides. And he says that we live in fraternal families where women are killed. So the answer of society has been really strong, and women have organized themselves. In this context, we could see in March, for example, the feminist chain against violence, the march of the 8th of March, where the figures are, official figures are small, but probably more than 100,000 women marched just in Mexico City and in other countries and in other entities of the country. And on the 9th, we made a movement that was One Day Without Women, where we decided not to go to work. And probably this cost the economic in the country $1.5 billion. So women are organizing ourselves. And a group of women, we decided, as we have the right to know, we decided to push forward our efforts to make public official data of the states and official information that the government is ignoring and minimizing. And I think I'll leave it here and we can move forward in the Q&A. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Claudia. I want to go next to Jane Harmon, who I know has a question for all of you. Jane?
Yes, hold on. Hi, everybody. Am I?
Hi, we can hear you.
Okay, you can hear
There
me.
you are.
That was fascinating and depressing. Thank you very much for depressing everybody on a Monday. But what was most fascinating to me was the notion that law enforcement has a stereotype of what is a law enforcement issue, and this isn't it. And it seems like a huge amount of re-education has to happen. That's true in this country too, by the way, about racism in particular, although we have a problem with gender-based violence that I don't think is getting much better either. So my question is about women's leadership, something we really care about at the Wilson Center and something I'm sure you all care about. At least 2 countries in Latin America, and I've probably overlooked others, have had women leaders, Argentina and Chile. And maybe some countries in Latin America have had women as head of their justice systems, or in the United States, we have many women who are police chiefs. Does it matter in terms of overcoming these stereotypes if a woman is in charge?
Who would like to take that? Claudia?
I could go,
Go,
Claudia, and then Georgiana.
Okay, thank you. Jane, that's an incredible question. And I know that you've been pushing forward women's leadership all over, including in think tanks. So yeah, I like that. Yeah, I think it makes a difference. The fact that there are women in leadership. In Mexico, for example, through the political reform of 2014, we have now a parity Congress, for example. And we have at least half of the women in the Chamber of Deputies and Senate as women. But I think it's really important to understand that having body of women doesn't necessarily imply that we have a gender perspective on things. In this government, for example, in the actual government in Mexico, there are many women at the executive level. But as you can say by the results, there's no gender perspective in the policy outcomes. So I think that we have to put together women's leadership and push forward the increasing participation of women. And also we have to push forward gender perspective, education policies, and implementation of policies with a gender perspective. I think they should go hand in hand. Women, the participation of women is really important, but we have to push forward in a parallel way the gender perspective in every area of the decision-making process.
Thank you, Claudia. I think that, thank you, Jane. This is a wonderful question. And in the same lines, I would very much in relation to my own experience, I lived in Finland in 2005. And I think that you really need to have that equity and parity throughout the system. You need to be able to see women in technology. You have to be able to see women driving trucks. You have to be able to see women everywhere. And not only as a leader. As a leader, definitely, and there should be absolutely no question, but you need to have to break those stereotypes and to be able to insert women throughout basically society. In Finland, you have the quotas, basically 49% of women everywhere. So right now, that was 1995, sorry. So in 2020, it's very normal for you to have women as representatives, women as presidents, women as prime ministers, women in Finland. Whether in Latin America, we are still debating if, or it's still very hard to find women in technology, women in science. So that, I think that definitely we need leaders, we need quotas. I do believe that you need to put, we're not going to get there if there isn't very much a policy and a demand to do so. Otherwise, we won't get. Here in El Salvador, there is the 30% quota in parliament. There is a gender parity law that is ongoing. It hasn't passed yet, but I think that this is one of the ways you can push the presence of women in society. Thank you.
Go ahead, Juliana.
I agree with my colleagues, Claudia and Georgiana. And well, here in Brazil, we had the first woman president, Dilma Rousseff, and you all saw what happened to her. And part of what happened, I think that it's because she's a woman. We cannot see this happening now with Bolsonaro, and that doesn't happen with Temer, and so on. But I think that we should, talking about tackling violence against women within the police forces, education is very important. Some of the institutions here, a police woman will never reach the highest positions and commanding troops or being the general chief of the police institution. It will never happen. For her, it's impossible. So this is when we look to good practice carried out by police officers, we can see that the better ones are the ones that the institution does not only educate or train the police officers, but also have practices like a bulletproof vest for women, or it allows women and men has the same possibility to achieve the highest position in the institution. It's not about only educating police officers, it's about practice within the institution that shows all that this is an important issue, and we are not only talking about it, we are practicing with our police women, for example. But of course, we need women, as Georgiana said, in every field. We need women in leadership positions within all the institutions.
I think all of this touches on a similar question that I had, which is how much can you do through the judicial system alone? And how much requires kind of broader work within society to change gender norms and change some of the attitudes that societies have about the roles of women and men, and how much violence might be acceptable. The question of violence being just a dispute maybe between a husband and a wife, right? Something no different from an argument. So how much can we do through the judicial system, through training police and prosecutors, and how much needs to be this broader effort through society? Anyone like to take that? Georgiana?
Sorry, just unmuting myself. Yeah, no, I think this is a great question. We definitely need to work with the judicial system. There is a long way to go still with the judicial system, working with the police. As there are not many police officers who are women and who are there to support, you do need to work through with the judicial system, really work on laws, work on implementing those laws, work on really basically also with the men who are there, because as we know, there are many men who are there, to have champions and to have vocal leaders, also male vocal leaders in the judicial system. I think that's very important, and to break these barriers and to actually have inclusion. But at the same time, and that's why I started my presentation with my first slide was the bias. And the bias that's getting worse throughout time. What are we doing wrong that in these past 10 years, women are seen more excluded than they should be? What are we doing wrong? And I think this is one question that we really should be asking ourselves. We cannot, if the perception of the women, not only the men, is that women should have a different role in society and should have or are not good at this or not good at that. You know, we are definitely doing something wrong, and we are not going to only be able to achieve results if we don't work on that, and if we don't work on the spheres that I mentioned, also on development. So it's also a question of how much power the women have in terms of financial. How can they be independent? How can they leave their home if they're being threatened and be outside and have a life and to be able to support for themselves and support for their children? These are real life questions that women have to answer, and that we have to answer in able to cut this epidemic of violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Claudia?
I like your question, Anya. Thank you so much. I think that, yeah, definitely, we have to work with the judicial system, but we have to work, in the case of Mexico specifically, in the rule of law and in due process. When we have systemic impunity, it's really difficult to find a solution. The problem is not the creation of new laws, because we have an extraordinary legal framework. What we're lacking is implementation of law, the follow-up of the filing, and rule of law and due process. And we need an institutional compromise. It's really difficult to live every day with systemic and institutional violence, and where you're being violated by the institutions that are supposed to protect you. We have a problem there. And I think we have to work in parallel, and I think that Juliana and Georgiana have mentioned it before. We have to work strong in our culture. Our region, and that's where I began with this data of 16 of the 25 worst countries are in our region. I mean, I don't want to be an anthropologist, because I'm not, but we can go back to the origins of these of the violence in our region and the gender-based violence in our region. In Mexico, specifically, violence is so normalized in our culture that a few decades ago, domestic violence was not talked about, because good and nice and educated people don't talk about their private issues in the public sphere. So my husband could try to kill me, but if I was a nice lady, I was not supposed to talk about it. And there's still a lot of people that think about it. And we have also to work closely with the whole ecosystem, you know, the media. The media keeps on re-victimizing the victims. Whenever a woman is found killed, the spotlight is put on the victim. She was wearing a short skirt. What was she doing very early or very late? Or what was she doing alone? Instead of having the spotlight on the criminal, on the killer. And we tend to view these women only as figures, and that's why it has been so important for us to name the victims. And I mean, we have these cases. It's Fatima, a 7-year-old girl. I mean, how can someone dare to say that she was the one provoking to be killed? Fatima Aldrigueti, that's her name. Ingrid Escamilla, Verónica Guadalupe Benitez. They are not just Lupita or that woman. It's women with names, with history, the ones that are being killed. And the strongest answer is coming from civil society. And we'll keep pushing forward. I mean, we cannot keep on living institutional violence when we have a government that says that feminists and women are pushed forward and paid by neoliberals and the extreme right. I mean, it's an insult to women, to our intelligence, and to every single human being. We are talking, we're screaming, we're taking the streets because we're being killed and no one is paying us, no? So I think it's really important to approach the issue from the judicial, of course, because we need the law enforced, we need a due process of law, and we need rule of law. But we have to work in all these other areas. And first of all, and that's why I applaud and congratulate the Wilson Center, we have to make visible the things that the governments are trying to make invisible. And women, we are not a minority. We are 50 or 51% of the world population. In Mexico, we're 51. And we have to stop thinking as a minority. We're the majority. And we don't have an impact in the policy-making process, in the judicial system. And we are still living afraid to be women because we might be killed.
Yeah. Hard to say anything after that. Very powerful. I know, Juliana, there are many similar issues in Brazil.
Yes, I just want to add something that the realities of our countries are very similar. I would like to add that there are some experiences here that only arresting the aggressor or this doesn't solve the problem. He will, or restraining or putting restraining orders against him won't solve the problem. And there are many states here that now, as part of his penalty, he has to participate in a men's group to discuss violence, gender-based violence, to look to those gender roles that were supposed to be performed by men and women, because here domestic violence here, as in Mexico, are it's a kind of violence that we can hear our neighbor being beaten or being hurt, and we don't do anything because this is women and husband issue, and we don't have to intervene or something like that. So there are different experiences now that are being carried out by many states, and the results are very good, because I've participated in some groups in Santa Catarina, and there was a man saying that he was he ended an abusive relationship with a woman, and he started another one, and with this new partner he wasn't violent or aggressive, because he was reflecting and thinking about what he did in his previous relationship, and that's a great achievement, I think. And this is part of his penalty. So the judicial system, they are thinking of alternative to address this question.
And in Brazil, there's also the Maria da Penha patrols, right? The police patrols.
Right.
So could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because I think it's a really interesting model for more consistent engagement.
Yes, we have the patrulhas Maria da Penha. They are carried out by military police. When a woman has a restraining order against her partner or the aggressor, the Patrulha Maria da Penha will visit her to see if the man is not there. Sometimes they find the man inside the house because he doesn't think that he doesn't understand. Sometimes he understands and goes there and he knows that he cannot be there. But sometimes he doesn't understand that he cannot be with his wife because it's his right to do whatever he wants with his wife or his partner. But the Patrulha Maria da Penha works fiscalizing this restraining orders in many states of Brazil and many cities, because they can be carried out by guardas civis municipais, which is our municipal police. And the challenge for them is to be able to work within a broader net of protection, with it's more with more people involved, not only the police, the health system, the social assistant system. So it's a really it's a challenge not only to arrest the man if he's not following the restraining order, but addressing the woman to the services that she needs, to health care, to social care, to psychological care. So it's a beginning here, this kind of patrol. And there are many good experiences. In the page of Brazilian Forum Public Safety, we have videos of some of these experiences in English with English subtitles. So if you have any interest in knowing these experiences, you can go there. I can put here on the chat group the address. So
we would be happy to share those materials with everyone. Georgiana, I think you wanted to add something as well.
Yeah, no, just to react to Juliana, and I think one thing that we should definitely promote is South-South cooperations between these countries, because really the situations are similar. And one thing that we didn't mention here is the gang violence. And this is also something that the three countries have, and this idea that Juliana was mentioning of ownership of women is something that is very present as well in the three countries. And we know that these is something that it's part of citizen security, but also in relation to violence against women, because obviously there are different dynamics in relation to women who belong to gangs or who are sisters or basically live within those environments. And one thing, though, also that in El Salvador is very different from the other countries is that this country had a war very recently. So we know that the institutions are very fragile here as well. So we really need to invest a lot on rebuilding this judicial system and to make sure that it works for everyone, but that it has really a specific eye on this gender issues. It was just that I'd like to add. Thank you.
Jan, would you like to add? Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I thought you were mentioning Jane. Yeah, thank you, Georgiana, for pushing it forward too. The organized crime is also doing terrific things, and femicides in the context of gangs and organized crime is also extremely violent. And the violence against women's victims is duplicated or triplicated. And this kind of specific femicide has not diminished during the pandemic. As a matter of fact, it has increased. On Mondays, nosotras tenemos otros datos. We are presenting every single Monday a press conference at 11 o'clock Mexico City time to present the data, the situation, and the specific political positioning that we're taking for this permanent institutional violence that we're facing, and we're bringing forward these data that are not made public nor official, but we have almost in every single state of our country, we have organizations that are bringing this information forward and bringing the data. So you're invited. I can put the information here so you can follow us on our Facebook group to see the information. And I think this is something that we could also share regionally and in our countries, because I guess we have this continuum of lack of official information versus media and civil organizations info.
And the question of data is a really important one. So I'm glad you raised it, Claudia, because a lot of policy decisions and decisions on where to allocate resources are made based on data, right? And we know that data about femicide and gender-based violence more broadly is really lacking. So are there any suggestions? What are the programs underway? How do we make sure that we get the data we need to target policies and funding to address this problem? Claudia, it looked like you or Georgiana.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. First, we need to push forward the gender agenda, the fight against violence against women. We have to work strongly to make visible these things that want to be invisible, and definitely we need more women in the whole system participating. I mean, when, for example, when we have worldwide, and when we know that only 20 or 25% of women are anchors of the news, we start to understand why is it that the gender agenda is not in the news. Or when it's in the news, it's not necessarily from the standpoint that that is gender neutral or pushes forward the gender agenda. So yeah, Jane's question at the beginning of the Q&A is really important. In order to start solving these problems, we need more women at the top level policy making process and throughout the whole area, as Georgiana was saying. But we have to push forward more women making policy decisions and having a voice in the policy making process vertically and horizontally.
Georgiana?
Yeah, completely agreed. Now, I would like to mention specifically on data, the portal infosegura.org, that is an effort that I was mentioning in the beginning that UNDP is doing with USAID, and it's a regional project. So there is information it's on citizen security in the whole region. And this is something that Central America region. And this is something that we've been doing for many years now, and to try to exactly systematize the data. And this has opened a lot of space as well with the judicial system, with the police, because we keep asking and getting this information from them and systematizing, putting on a type of observatory and feeding it back to them. So this has been something that not only it is transparency, we have putting it as a transparency issue in the country, but also it has given us a platform to talk to those institutions, to put them together, to promote coordination and a dialogue between these institutions that not necessarily wouldn't talk to each other. So this has been really important for us, especially because we have the Sustainable Development Goal 16 out of everyone. I think that this one is specifically in relation to security, to justice, to reinforcement of justice is really crucial. Thank you.
And Juliana, I know your organization does a lot of data work.
Yes, I would like to add that, of course, in Brazil, it's a challenge to have access to the data, and part of our job is to give visibility to data related to violence and public security in Brazil. We have here an information access law And it's through that the forum gets the data with the official authorities, like the police institutions. And in the beginning of the pandemic, the president, Bolsonaro, tried to limit information during this period, saying that it's a crisis and all the information required through this information access law wouldn't be given because we are in a crisis and so on. And he couldn't do this because of the pressure from civil society. And I think we have all to be aware and because here in Brazil we have all constantly our rights are being in danger, so we have to be really aware for these questions. And there's another problem producing data in Brazil, that the agents responsible for registering the crimes, for example, they don't have enough skills to do this. And sometimes when we talk about the femicides, sometimes the police authority does not have the gender perspective and it does not look at that crime as a gender-based crime or gender-based killing. So we have the problem of transparency, and we have a problem with the ability of those who are responsible in producing the data. We don't have good people prepared to look at, to register what is happening. It's very common, for example, when the military police goes to a domestic violence case, when a woman calls the emergency number, our 911 here, sometimes the police officer thinks that it's a minor crime and he doesn't even register that he was there. He tries to talk with the couple, to convince them to be okay, to be in peace, not to fight. And this is not his or her role, but it's very common here that police officers go in this kind of cases and that doesn't even register that they've been there. So we don't have the numbers. We don't know for all the, we don't know that that doesn't become statistic.
Yeah. I think we could easily go on for another 90 minutes, but we're nearing the end. So I just want to ask all of you to give, your 60-second closing. What is, the one thing that our audience should take away? Claudia, do you want to go first? Put you on the hot seat.
Thank you to the Wilson Center, and thank you to my colleagues and for all the audience that's here. I would just say we cannot close our eyes to our reality that it's killing half of the population in this world. We're not just a topic, we're half of the population, and what happens to women affects civil society as a whole. It's not a women's issue, it's a society, security, political issue for everyone. So we should all work together to push this forward and solve it.
Thank you. Juliana, your final thought?
We have 1 minute, I think.
Yes.
I would like to say, to face this pandemic moment, I would say that we should all be aware and be available to our neighbors, women neighbors that are being victims of violence, and don't think that it's not your problem. It is a problem of all of us. So I think, thank you all for today. Thank you, Wilson Center, for the invitation. It was great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Juliana. And Georgiana, the final word to you.
Thank you very much. Well, first to thank you and really congratulations on the initiative. It's a very needed one. I would like to finalize on a positive note. I think that these types of initiatives are popping up. We have seen the Me Too's, all kinds of movements that have been putting things on the agenda. So I'm positive that we should really go and use this moment to put these issues on the agenda. It is, femicide is the tip of the iceberg and the worst part of the iceberg, but women are suffering violence every day on the streets, on the buses, in their homes, on the supermarket, in their workplace, being harassed. It's a systemic issue. We cannot go on with this if we want a better future. And now with COVID, we're talking about constructing a new future. And we really should look and put gender in the center of this new future.
Thank you, Georgiana. Juliana, Claudia, it has been a real pleasure talking with you today. I'd like to thank as well Jane Harmon for her support and for the Wilson Center's support in discussing this important issue. And I hope you'll all join us in continuing the conversation, because I think there is so much more to discuss and so much more that we can do. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.